Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jessie Broadway and I'm married to Mark, who's the Ministry Area Leader here in the Ministry Area of Penybont, Ogwr. And I'm keen to talk to you, Mark, specifically about the 4 cultural pillars that you've been talking about recently. So before we crack on, can you tell me what are those 4 key cultural pillars?
Yeah, of course. Prayerfulness, evangelism, hospitality, and generosity.
Brilliant, thank you. And why specifically do we need cultural pillars? We'll go into the details of the 4 and what they're about shortly, but why do we need any cultural pillars at all?
Every organisation has a culture. The question is whether we're intentional about what that culture is. Coming to the Ministry Area of Penybont, Ogwr, I was really keen that we be intentional about the sort of community that we want to be, the sort of community that God is calling us to be, and that we don't allow ourselves to be drawn along and be a sort of community without thought. Actually, God is calling us to be a particular way, and we can be really intentional about forming those traits in our shared life together.
So why these ones particularly? Why these 4 cultural pillars? Where did they come from?
Speaking to the Ministry Area Council and church wardens, church vergers, and other office holders and people who do things in church, I was keen to draw out the sort of church that we already are, the sort of ministry area that we already are. What do we hold really important? How do we do things? But then to look at how God is calling us further on. And so in talking to the Ministry Area Council and others, it became clear to me that we are a prayerful, evangelistic, generous and hospitable community, ministry area, but actually that in these areas God is calling us deeper.
And so why do we need 4 cultural pillars? So you're talking about us going deeper, but surely we can go deeper in everything and in loads of different ways. Why focus on these 4?
At the heart of it is that we must do something. If we want to see our churches grow and thrive and mature, and I'm sure they will, it won't happen by accident. It will happen by us choosing to follow Jesus on the path that he's leading us. And the question then is, what does that look like? And what does it look like today? There are all sorts of good things that we might do and might want to prioritise, but we can actually only do so many of them, and we can only prioritise so many things at once.
Well, let's take each of the 4 in turn and just dig into each one a little bit deeper. So the first one, prayerfulness and prayer. What does it mean when you talk about building a prayerful culture for this ministry area?
Yeah, I want us to be a community that draws close to God in prayer. That means bringing our thanksgivings and our requests to him, but it also means opening our hearts to hear from him. And it means doing that together as a community.
You were talking, I know, earlier about hearing from God and being expectant. Could you just unpack that a little bit more as well?
Yeah, prayer is about being in community with God, living with God as part of our lives. God is a verbal God. God is a God who speaks through his word, but by his spirit. And so when we as a group of believers pray together, we can discern what God is saying to us as a church.
Tell me a little bit about why prayer is important to you, particularly you. For you personally, why is prayer important?
Yeah, and prayer has been such a central part of my life now for my entire adult life. 20 odd years I've been praying. And it's given me a real sense of rootedness that comes from that regular connection to God. And I think that's... a lot of people might think, oh, it's easy for you. You're a vicar. Your job is to pray. I suppose there's truth in that. But actually, long before I was ordained, long before I even thought about the ministry, that rootedness in God through prayer was vital to me. And I think it can benefit everyone.
And I think that it's worth to kind of just dwelling on that for a second, because you talk about, it's easy for you, you're a vicar. But we also have prayer in church. We have the daily offices that are said often by the clergy. So why is this important to us the kind of the rest of the congregation as part of the ministry area.
There's something about building that sort of personal relationship with God through prayer. There's something, yes, we recognise our corporate settings where we pray together or pray as one voice in the church, but that is so deeply enriched by lives which are saturated by prayer. And we do that day by day, either on our own or in small groups or in larger groups, bringing our own particular concerns, our own particular thanksgivings to God. Yes, there's a place for the corporate prayer of the church, and that's vital, but it is personal relationship that God wants with us, and that is expressed through this relationship of prayer.
So you're talking about personal prayer, kind of our own individual prayer, but you're also talking about kind of the corporate prayer that happens as part of the life of the body of Christ, the life of the church. And I feel like I'm hearing something in there about sort of a smaller group prayer as well, so not just the formal services.
Yes. So something perhaps in the middle between the sort of personal, daily, on your own, you and God, and then the corporate coming together as the body of Christ. But I think there's a space for groups of individuals to come and pray together. And that's really important because it enables us to encourage one another, to build one another up, and to be built up as we see God at work in the lives of others through the prayers that they raise and the answers to those prayers that they see.
And we see Jesus talking about that in the Bible, don't we? In terms of, he says, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I will be also. We know that individual prayer is really important, but there's a sort of special promise that comes from Jesus, isn't there, in that verse that says he's going to be there, particularly when there's two or three or more of you gathered together. So there is something important there.
That's right. And coming together for prayer builds that sense of community through intimacy of that spiritual bond that enables us to pray for one another in a way that we just simply can't do if we aren't praying at the same time or praying in a group.
So if we're building this culture across the ministry area of prayerfulness, practically, what does that look like and what does that mean?
Yeah, lots of different things. It looks like doing more and having more events and more things to go to over the coming year. At the moment, we've got our 7:14 early morning prayer meeting on a Wednesday, and it's been so good to see that grow and thrive and the relationships formed there. But it's also going to look like a monthly central prayer meeting where we're going to see lots of people from across the ministry area gathering together to pray. And it also looks like people leaning into this idea of praying on their own more and growing their own personal discipline of prayer.
So there's a few things in there for us as sort of the congregations of the 8 churches. It's developing and perhaps growing, stretching our own personal prayer lives. It's getting involved with the church prayer meetings or prayer events as they happen, whether it's 7:14 or something else. Well, let's pause there. There's a lot more I could ask you about prayer, and we haven't even got into how we deal with unanswered prayers or anything like that. But let's talk about the second cultural pillar, which is evangelism. So what does it mean to have a culture of evangelism across the ministry area?
To have a culture of evangelism means that we are a people of the good news about Jesus. It means that we're confident in our understanding of what Jesus has done for us by his saving death and resurrection, and we're confident also to share it with others. And what I find in my own life and speaking with other Christians is that the more we grow in understanding and confidence in what God has done through Jesus, the more excited we are to share it.
So tell me a little bit more for you. What has evangelism done in your life, or where has somebody else's evangelism impacted you personally?
I mean, I'm a Christian today, a vicar today, because I was successfully evangelized 20 odd years ago. It's further than 20 every time I tell the story. I was 15 years old, and I was invited along to a church barbecue, free food. A 15-year-old can't resist. And from there, I was invited to come and experience life as a Christian in church. And through that, I was taught about the work of Jesus, his person, his life, his death, and his resurrection. That opened my eyes to see the world in a really exciting and new way.
I know God makes such a difference to my life, and I could tell stories as you have of the difference that he makes to me and why my life is better for having a faith in a living Lord. But I suppose it is that, isn't it, that we're talking about here in terms of telling and being confident to tell of our own experience of that faith and that grounding that we have in God.
Yeah, I think that's what people are so keen to hear, especially in the modern world. There's lots of competing truth claims. What I think resonates with people is real stories from my life, your life, from each of our members' lives. All the research at the moment seems to suggest that people are very wary of the church and of institutions, and for a lot of good reasons behind that. But people are very open to hearing the stories of people's faith and the way that God has been at work in their lives.
So what is evangelism going to look like practically? If we're building a culture of evangelism across the ministry area, practically speaking, what will that look like?
So it looks like growing in confidence of our understanding of what the gospel is, that Jesus died on the cross for us and was raised again for our justification to make us right with God. But then growing also in our confidence to share that message with others. That isn't just about inviting people to church. It's about sharing the good news of Jesus with others. That will look like inviting people to the Alpha course, coming along with them. It will look like sharing our own stories. It will look like being open to hearing stories.
It'll look like a few different things, won't it? In terms of, I suppose, talking about our own faith, even within our churches, amongst our congregations, being able to talk from the heart about where faith is impacting our lives just day to day, telling stories of how a bigger difference that has made even just in the last week.
And I think that's where we have to begin as we grow in our confidence. One of the reasons that I think we're not very good at talking to others about our faith is that we're not very good at talking even within our churches about faith. And so we're going to do more and more to grow our confidence and our ability in that way, such as by the Alpha course or by the Biblios course or other ways that we get together as Christians and encourage one another in these stories and in these understandings of the gospel.
One of my favourite verses in the Bible is in Revelation, and it says the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, which essentially means that when we tell the story of what Jesus has done in our lives, we are prophesying of what is to come. We're going to tell people of what he's done in our lives. It tells them of what he can do in their life. And that can be, yes, the very practical, big stuff in terms of he's saved me, but equally it can be the little things like God can provide in my life when I'm struggling with energy or with lack of finances or whatever, what have you. But if I can tell you a story of how God has provided for me, it's going to raise your faith, and it prophesies of, it tells of how God is going to do that again in the future in someone else's life. So let's talk about our third value, which is generosity. So what does it mean to have a culture of generosity?
Generosity is a posture of heart towards God. It's a posture of thankfulness, of faith, and of love, because generosity is all about giving back really fundamentally to God. In thanksgiving, because we recognize everything has come from God. Everything that we have is entrusted from God to us. And so we offer it back in thanksgiving, and we offer it back with faith because we believe he's a good God and he's going to continue to provide as he's provided in the past. We believe with faith that he will continue to provide for us. And we share all that we have with generous hearts as an act of love, because our generosity enables us to serve others. And that's an outflowing of God's heart and God's love for the world. So all that we have is entrusted to us by God for a purpose. Yes, one of those purposes is for us to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the things that we have, whether that's our money or our free time or our skills. It's good to enjoy it, but that's not the only reason that God has given us things. He's given us things so that we can serve one another, so that we can serve people and love Him and glorify Him.
It is hard, though, isn't it? In terms of being very honest and very practical, it's really hard, isn't it, actually, to think about giving away and working out practically, where do I put my time, where do I put my effort, where do I put my skills? I'm only one person, I only have so much energy, I only have so much ability to give away, I only have so much money, and I've still got to pay all the bills and the food and all the rest of it.
There's absolutely a hierarchy of the heart at play here, and that's one of the reasons that so often in the Bible and then in the life of the early church, what we see often being taught is the idea of first fruits. Give to God first, not what you've got left over, whether it's big or small or whatever, but actually give to God first, so that you are setting up within yourself this sense of priority, that this is important to me. And as with any skill or any discipline, it grows. As we do it regularly, we see the beneficial effects that it has on our life. We realise that actually we have control over those possessions. They don't have control over us. So often we get it the wrong way around, and we try to cling on to these things, thinking that will help us to own them. But in fact, the opposite happens, and more tightly we cling on to our money or our spare time, the more actually we realise that we are captivated by them. And so God would have us have this hierarchy of the heart where we set Him first, and we give to Him of the first fruits, and then everything else sort of falls into place from there. If we practice generosity with joyful hearts, we discover that we actually become generous people. And generous people are people who reflect the very nature of God. And isn't that an incredible thing, that we can go on a journey with God towards becoming more like Him, in our attitudes and in our perceptions and in the way that we act.
So what does being generous mean to you? What does it look like in your life?
It looks like fundamentally putting God first, and therefore prioritizing the things that God prioritizes: other people, the poor, those who are in need, His worship, the support of His church. It means committing to tithing, giving 10% of my income to support the work of the church across the world. It means sharing my food. It means being generous with my time, with people who want something from me. And so that's how it sort of plays out.
Fab. So what will this mean for us as a ministry area?
Yeah.
For a culture, what does it mean to be a generous people?
Yeah. Often, people ask me, how much does the church need? This is not about servicing need. This is about cultivating within ourselves Christian generosity. And as we do that, we will find that we are less interested in relying on other people's money for ourselves. And so we will rely less and less on fundraising for ourselves, which will enable us as a church to give away more, to give away much, much more to charities and to gospel work and missionary work around the world.
And I suppose it's not just about money either, is it? This is about your time and people's skills and abilities as well as money.
And so one of the things I'll often talk about when I talk about generosity is time, talent, and treasure. So our time, literally the hours that we've got in a day, they are only finite. Some of us have more spare ones than others, but we are called to be generous with our time. Our talents, the things that we're good at, the skills that we have and our abilities. Some people are excellent musicians, some people are excellent administrators. Are we being generous with our skills to support the church and those in need? And then finally, our treasure, our money. That needs to be part of the equation. It's not the only thing, but we will find often the things that we hold most important will be the most challenging to give away.
Fab, thank you. So let's move on to our final cultural pillar, the hospitality one. So tell me, what does it mean to be a hospitable culture?
To have a hospitable culture is to model in our lives and in our churches the welcome that we have received from God. So all of us who are Christians know something of God's welcome, the way that God has drawn us into his family, created a space for us to be ourselves, a space where we're safe and cared for and loved, a space where our voice can be heard. We as Christians know what that feels like to have that space made for us. And now as Christians, we're called to make that space for others.
What does that look like in your life, or what has that looked like in your life? You talk about we all know this. What do you know of it?
In my own life, the welcome of God that I've felt has been that assurance of love, in a way that that I've never really felt in other places or from other sources. God's welcome has been an embrace of love that has shaped my life and changed me. That has made me the sort of person who wants others to feel something of that love. Fundamentally, that means that I want them to come into relationship with God. But the steps towards that look like opening my home to others, opening my life to others, opening my dining room table to others. And that's what hospitality means to me.
So what's it going to look like, and what does it mean practically for us as a ministry area?
So one of the things that it means is the way that we practice welcome and hospitality in our churches. We're already, I think we are, we're already welcoming churches. We've got brilliant welcome ministry, but that needs to grow and develop. We need to look at how accessible our places of worship are and how accessible our forms of worship are, so that people really do truly feel welcome, even if they feel led to worship in a way that is different from us, that they can have a space with us. It's going to mean eating together more, sharing food together more, sharing our homes, opening our doors, opening our lives, doing life together. The question is, do we want to be the sort of church, the sort of ministry area that grows? I believe that we do want to see growth, not only in our own Christian life and discipleship, but also in our number. And we get there by praying that God would do that work for us, by sharing the good news of evangelism, the good news of the gospel in evangelism. We get there by being generous with our time and with our skills and with our money, to put on events that people might come to run alpha courses, and to pay for ministry and for keeping our churches open. And then fundamentally welcoming those people, showing them hospitality, letting them see a glimpse, or feel a glimpse, if you like, of God's love in action.
So what comes next, Mark? Because you've been talking about these four cultural pillars for the last couple of months, and particularly over the last few weeks, you've been preaching about these four cultural pillars across the 8 churches. What's the next step? What comes next?
So we're going to take a little bit of time over the coming year to look at each one of these four pillars individually. So as we begin 2025, there's going to be a focus on prayer. And that's going to lead us to think about what changes do we need to see, what new things do we need. And that's going to look like a new central prayer meeting, 24/7 prayer, the daily office being said across the ministry area. And from prayer, we're going to move on to look at evangelism more closely, generosity and hospitality as the year plays out.
So what will that mean for each of the 8 churches? How does each church engage?
Over the next few months, I'm going to be taking the time to meet with each of the 8 congregations to talk about the ways in which they want to see these cultural pillars play out in their own congregations and in their own congregational life, the things that they put on, the events that they do. How can we be more intentional about the sort of communities that we are and the culture that underpins our activities?
And what about as individuals, as those of us across the ministry area are listening to this, listening to your preaching, starting to engage with those 4 cultural pillars and those 4 values? What will that mean for each individual, and what can we do to take steps forward in each of those?
I'm going to be trying to produce more teaching resources, more conversations, podcasts, videos. I'm going to be giving book recommendations, blog recommendations, and writing a little bit myself to encourage people in these particular areas, things that they can take away and do themselves so that they can grow in these disciplines and grow in this culture together.
And if people have got ideas for how we can grow across the ministry area in these things,
it would be great to hear from them. One of the things that I really love about this ministry area is the way that we're working together, not just working together, but actually hearing from God together. And we do that in this sort of really prayerful culture that we're building together, where we're able to share with confidence what we believe we're hearing from the Lord.
Fabulous. Mark, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to talk through these 4 cultural pillars. We'll try and get some more time over the coming months to go into some of these in more depth in this format, so we can really dig deeper into some of these topics, because they are huge topics. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.